Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 19. Itam Munis tu paramed Vyavastito Vigyana Drig Virya Saranhitashaya Sva Parshnina Udam Tato Nilam Staneshu Satsunamayaj Jita Klamaha Itam Munistu Paramedvyavastito Vigyana Drigvirya Saranhitashayaha Swaparshninapi Gudam Tato Nilam Staneshu Satsunamayajjita Klamaha Itam Munistu Paramedvyavastito Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditashayaha Swaparshninapi Tato Nilam Staneshu Satsun Namayajjita Klamaha Itam Munistu Paramedvyavastito Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditashayaha Swaparshninapi Gudam Tato Nilam Staneshu Satsun Namayajjita Klamaha
Itam Munistu Paramedvyavastito
Itam Munistu Paramedvyavastito
Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditasyaha
Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditashayaha
Saparshninapi Jagudam Tatonulam
Swaparshninapi Gudam Tato Nilam
Staneshu Satsunamayajjita Klamaha
Staneshu Satsunamayajjita Klamaha
Itang Munistu Paramedvyavastito
Itam Munishtu Paramedvyavastito
Vigyana Drigvirya Sarantitashayaha
Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditashayaha
Saparshninapi Jagudang Tato Nilang
Parshadapi Gudam Tato Nilam
Staneshu Shatsunamayajjita Klamaha
Jita Klamaha
Munas tu Paramed Ayashtito
Itam Munishtu Paramedvyavastito
Yana Drigvig Survandaya Itashaya
Vigyana Drigvirya Saranditashayaha
Swaparaman Vidya Gudam Tato Nilam
Parshadapi Gudam Tato Nilam
Saneshu Satsunaya Mai Jita Laha Idham munistu paramedyavyasito
Manishtu paramedya vashtito.
Vijnana drigriya suranat hatish sayaha Parshni napidya gudam tato nilam Staneshu statsu namaye jita klamaha
Itam munistu para Vijnana-drigvirya suranditashayah Vijnana-drigvirya suranditashayah Swaparshni-napi dyagudam tato nilam Swaparshni-napi dyagudam tato nilam Sthaneshu shatsu namayejjita-klamaha Sthaneshu satsu namayejjita-klamaha
Idam munistu paramedyavyastito
Itam munistu paramedya vashito
Vijnana drigvirya surandita shayaha
Vijnana drigvirya suranditashayah
Swaparshnina pidya gudam tato nilam
Taparshnina vidyagudam tato nilam
Staneshu shatsu namaye chita klamaha
Saneshu satsu namayeshita klamaha Itam. Thus, by Brahman realization, Munihi, the philosopher, to but Uparament should retire, Yavashtitaha, well situated, Vijnanadrik, by scientific knowledge, Virya, strength, Surandita, well regulated, Ashayaha, aim of life, Saparshnina, with the heels or with the heel of one's foot, Apidya, by blocking, Gudam, the air hole, Tataha, thereafter, Anilam, life air. Would you mind turning this down a little bit? Staneshu, in the places, Satsu, 6 primary, Unamayet, must be lifted, Chitta Klamaha, by extinguishing material desires. Translation: by the strength of scientific knowledge, one should be well situated in the absolute realization, and thus be able to extinguish all material desires. One should then give up the material body by blocking the air hole through which stool is evacuated with the heel of one's foot, and by lifting the life air from one place to another in the 6 primary places. Purport: there are many Duratmas who claim to have realized themselves as Brahman, and yet are unable to conquer material desires. In the Bhagavad Gita 1854, it is clearly explained that an absolutely self-realized soul becomes completely aloof from all material desires. Material desires are based on the false ego of the living being and are exhibited by his childish and useless activities to conquer the laws of material nature and by his desire to lord it over the resources of the 5 elements. With such a mentality, one is led to believe in the strength of material science, with its discovery of atomic energy and space travel by mechanical vehicles. And by such tiny advancements in material science, the false egoist tries to challenge even the strength of the Supreme Lord, who can finish all man's tiny endeavors in less than a second. The well-situated self or Brahman realized soul perfectly understands that the Supreme Brahman, or the personality of Godhead, is the all-powerful Vasudeva, and that he, the self-realized living being, is a part and parcel of the supreme whole. As such, his constitutional position is to cooperate with him in all respects in the transcendental relation of the served and the servitor. Such a self-realized soul ceases to exhibit his useless activities of attempting to lord it over material nature. Being scientifically well informed, he fully engages himself in faithful devotion to the Lord. The expert yogi, who has thoroughly practiced the control of the life air by the prescribed method of the yoga system, is advised to quit the body as follows. He should plug up the evacuating hole with the heel of the foot and then progressively move the life air on and on to 6 places: the navel, abdomen, heart, chest, palate, eyebrows, and cerebral pit. Controlling the life air by the prescribed yogic process is mechanical, and the practice is more or less a physical endeavor for spiritual perfection. In olden days, such practice was very common for the transcendentalists, for the mode of life and character in those days were favorable. But in modern days, when the influence of Kali age is so disturbing, practically everyone is untrained in this art of bodily exercise. Concentration of the mind is more easily attained in these days by the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. The results are more effective than those derived from the inner exercise of the life air. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pa Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sandubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Maharaj, would you like to speak on this verse? By the strength of scientific knowledge, one should be well situated in absolute realization and thus be able to extinguish all material desires. One should then give up the material body by blocking the air hole through which stool is evacuated with the heel of one's foot and by lifting the life air from one place to another in the 6 primary places. Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the beginning of the purport this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, 1854, which is, one who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service to me. So this process of bhakti yoga is a science. It's not just some sentimental thing or some idea or something like this. So in that verse, Krishna was saying that this person is situated in transcendental consciousness. So earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked, what are the symptoms of someone who's situated in transcendental consciousness? So we can see it's scientific. Just like when someone goes to the doctor, they want to analyze what disease they might have. So they explain what are the general symptoms, like headache, this and that, or fever. And then what are the specific symptoms, like someone's passing discolored stool or something. So in this way, then they can tell, okay, you have jaundice or whatever it is. So Arjuna asks Krishna earlier in the Bhagavad Gita that to describe the symptoms of a self-realized or someone who's in this transcendental state of consciousness, how he walks, how he sits, these kind of things. So it's not religion like blind faith or do this, and then you ask why, and then the answer is go shut up or you go to hell. That would be blind faith, which we see it's not that, it's scientific. So Arjuna asks, and then Krishna defines it here in chapter 2, text 55. What are these symptoms? The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in transcendental consciousness. So the general symptoms that Krishna described were that he gives up all desire for sense gratification, which comes from mental concoction. So what does that mean? Sense gratification comes from mental concoction. We can see, what is Arjuna doing? He's confused. He's wondering, should I fight? Should I not fight? And from that confusion, then sense gratification begins. Because when the living entity is confused, then he wants to enjoy this material world. So from that state, we get all sorts of bad ideas, enjoy or renounce or whatever. Because Duryodhana, he wants to enjoy. And Arjuna, he wants to renounce. But both are wrong in this situation because it's coming from the mind. So that's mental concoction, that's sense gratification. So this is the point there, is that the renouncing is also bad. Arjuna is saying, I don't want to fight, and Krishna is saying, you're a fool. And Duryodhana is saying, I want to fight, and Krishna is also saying he's a fool. So what to do? Fight or not fight? Both of them are fools. So that's Arjuna's confusion. He's wondering, what should I do? You're telling him fighting is bad, and I'm saying I won't fight, but then you're saying that you'll kill all of them either way. So from this platform of the mind, both of the decisions seem wrong. So anything that we're doing from that platform is sense gratification from this mindset. Because it's coming from the mind, it's not coming from the plan of God. So if Krishna wants you to enjoy, then what should you do? You enjoy. And that's why Prabhupada writes the word mental concoction there, because generally we think sense gratification means just enjoyment, but it's also including renunciation. That's being explained in the first chapter and in the second chapter too. So the general symptom of a devotee is that he follows the orders of God, and that's spirituality. So he does what Krishna says. He's not concerned with just with renunciation. So if you want me to eat 100 puris, then I'll eat 100 puris. That's the mood of the devotee. And there's an example, because the basis of it is that he's following the orders of God. It's not that he has his own attachment to his own idea or plan. And then he's actually able to do whatever Krishna says. Not just, okay, I want this result, this plan, and then I'll just do whatever my mind tells me. But no, he's not attached either way. So Krishna can tell him, go here, do that, or go here and do the other thing, and he'll do it. So there's this example with Srila Prabhupada where when he arrived in one city, they got him a Rolls-Royce car to bring him from the airport to the temple. And so some of the reporters were saying, oh, what is this? This is supposed to be a spiritual leader, and he's in this nice car. He should be driving in something more simple. But Prabhupada said to his devotees, his disciples, that it's just a box of tin. And actually for me, there should be a chariot of gold, because I'm a devotee of God. So the spiritual master, the devotee, is worshipped as good as God. So we can see in that situation, it seems like the reporters are saying, well, what is this? It seems like enjoying, but actually he's the representative of Krishna. So externally, a devotee may look like it's enjoying, but actually, it's not enjoying. And so there's this example that Vivekananda, he would see the devotees eating nice prasadam and dancing. And then in one of his books, he wrote that these people are all wrong. They're not yogis, they're just enjoying. But that's the point there, is that both renunciation and enjoyment are wrong without God. So this Vivekananda person, he was actually on the wrong platform because he's trying to do these things for his own personal desires, but without God. So that's the point there. So Prabhupada explains that if you want to enjoy with Krishna. So there's so many things we're enjoying. Like we're hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's enjoyable. We're taking nice prasadam, dancing. There's nice music. That's enjoying. So that was one of the symptoms that was described. Let's see. One of the general symptoms that was given was that he finds satisfaction in the self alone. So what does that mean? Srila Prabhupada explains that a devotee, he can sit in one room and close his eyes and he's self-satisfied. So what does that mean? Well, there's two meanings. One is that he finds satisfaction in the service of God alone, because we know that there's the self, and then there's also the self of the self, or the Paramatma, Krishna. He's the like the soul of the soul, the super soul. So the devotee, he finds satisfaction in the service of God alone, and his happiness, it's not dependent on any other things. So when like right now, our happiness is dependent. We have to depend on so many different gadgets, the cell phone, the TV, this taste, that taste, all these different things. So our happiness is dependent on not non-self, but on other things. But when someone is self-realized, his happiness is independent of anything else. He doesn't need any gadgets or anything like this. He's happy. So that's liberation. He's not like a slave to anything else, like a slave to his senses or to his gadgets or his friends or this or that. So a liberated person in that way is independent. He finds satisfaction in the self alone, and then he can be fixed in transcendental consciousness. So he knows that Krishna is within him. He's liberated. So one reason that verse is also helpful is because these symptoms are described. So then we can see if we're fixed in transcendental consciousness, because we can check, am I experiencing those symptoms? Are they there? No, at least for me. So it's helpful so that we can see where we're at and if we're advancing. So those are some points about that verse that I thought were helpful. And Srila Prabhupada also brings up the point about the material scientists in the purport. Well, does anyone have any questions or comments so far on anything? Okay. Yes. Yeah, please.
So I actually saw this and I was thinking like, so where does this confusion come? You said when you say you say it's the beginning of sense gratification, but where does that come from? Like what should we be on the lookout for when we accidentally slip into sense gratification? What should we look out for?
Well, in that verse, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction. So it's that sense gratification is coming from mental concoction, taking shelter of the mind, our own plans, what the mind wants to do rather than what God or what Krishna wants us to do. So that confusion comes from not having the proper knowledge that actually I should do whatever it is that Krishna wants, accept that, and then whatever's not favorable for Krishna service, reject that. So we can, one thing is that the mind is pretty much employed by the intelligence. The mind is like an employee. He just needs the instructions or the orders, and then he goes to do that. And he's saying, and then the intelligence is more like the manager, so he's making the decisions. So the intelligence is above the mind. So the intelligence has to be strengthened by scriptural injunctions. So we can strengthen the intelligence with scripture. And then from that, we can use the intelligence to provide logic to the mind of why it should follow Krishna's instructions, or why it should follow the rules and regulations that are given in Shastra. Because without knowing the why or having that logic there, then the mind will rebel. Say, why are you telling me to do this? Who are you? But if we give it we strengthen the intelligence with Shastra, and then use that to provide logic to the mind of why to follow those injunctions, then we can stick to them enthusiastically. So like this, the senses are controlled by following rules and regulations, like Krishna also explains in that same chapter. And then the mind is controlled by thinking of Krishna, and the intelligence is strengthened by scriptural injunctions. And then above the senses, mind, and intelligence is the soul. And this is also explained there in that second chapter, is that the soul is strengthened by associating with Krishna. Srila Prabhupada explains in one of the purports. And so the way that we associate with Krishna is given here at the end of this purport by chanting his holy name. Because his name is none different than him, Krishna. So when we hear his name and chant his name, we're associating with him. And in that way, the soul becomes strengthened. So it's a full process. And in this day and age, all these other forms of yoga, like Srila Prabhupada explained in the purport, they're not possible. One of the reasons is the preliminary things of practicing these yoga processes, they're just not there in this day and age. So one of them is to be in a sanctified place, which everyone is living in big cities. There's so many people, but for the yoga process, they're supposed to go off to some secluded, sanctified place. So that's already, they're in the wrong environment. And then one of the first principles is that one should follow strict celibacy. So that's also not there. All the genders are freely mixing. Men and women are freely mixing and like this, becoming attached. So that's also not there. And then also one has to be able to control the mind and the senses very nicely to engage in that process. And even Arjuna, who's such a great transcendentalist, warrior, king, all of these, he has got so many material and spiritual qualifications. He's a dear friend to Krishna. And even he said, to control the mind like this is harder than controlling the raging wind. So these other yoga processes, they're not actually, we can see if they weren't applicable to Arjuna, how am I going to be qualified to do that? But this concentration of the mind, Prabhupada says, is more easily attained in these days by chanting the holy name of the Lord. And the results are more effective than those derived from the inner exercise of the life air. So it's the topmost process in this day and age for knowing who is God and reawakening our eternal relationship of service to him. Are there any other questions or comments? Realizations, corrections? Smagadari Prabhu?
Why are so many so-called spiritually inclined people of this day and age interested in breath work and poses.
Well, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it gives the symptoms of the age of Kali. So in the age of Kali, everything is pretty much backwards. So irreligion is taken as religion. It's called Kaitava Dharma, these cheating processes of religion. People will take to that because it's easier. They think, okay, I want to be seen as very spiritual, but I don't want to put in any effort. So then somebody tells them, okay, you can do this process and you don't have to follow any principle, but you'll be very spiritual and you'll make so much realization. I say, okay, I'll go with that one. It's like Prabhupada, I've heard this example come up, how as the Krishna consciousness movement was increasing, then some advertisements started coming up for some yoga movement. And the advertisement specifically said, join our movement. You don't have to follow principles of not eating meat, no illicit sex, no gambling, and no intoxication. So where they get that idea, they're just seeing what the bona fide process is that's given in Bhakti Yoga, and then they're just watering it down, trying to make it easy. And then so many people will join because they want the fruit of the activity without putting in any of the work. Was that something to the eye? Half pen logic. They want the eggs that the hen is giving, but this head part of it takes too much energy to keep feeding him. So cut off the head and I'll still get the eggs, but it doesn't work like that. So the bona fide process is there. Krishna is explaining it in the Bhagavad Gita. And we're hearing more about it here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if we take to that process, then all success is there. We make gradual advancement and eventually become attached to Krishna, and then reawaken our dormant love for Krishna, and then everything is set from there. Because that's ultimately what Krishna is explaining to do, is to love him. Or in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he's saying, work for me without being attached to the result. So how do we work for somebody without wanting anything in return? You have to love that person. So with that love can be there by we follow this process that's given, a gradual process, and then, which is pretty much the whole program Srila Prabhupada gave. Krishna is saying that in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he outlines the whole program. So we follow this program, and then gradually we become attached to Krishna, develop love for him, go back to him in the spiritual world. Are there any other questions or comments, corrections? Yes, Maternath Prabhu.
To appear spiritual. And I just thought I'd mention that's there in this movement too. Some people actually, unfortunately, they'll develop this idea of, okay, I'm initiated now, and what's the bare minimum I can do to achieve Krishna prema? You know, like, okay, I'll offer this chocolate bar because my tongue is asking for it, my mind is asking for it. But we see nowhere in scripture it says that Krishna takes chocolate. When people say, oh, you know, it's vegetarian, I'll offer that. Or people, they concoct things to fit their lifestyle, but they're missing the point. This whole idea of changing things just to fit your own, what you want to do is missing the point. And the point is that the goal of this Krishna consciousness is to attain love of God. And, you know, it's not something that's easily accessed, especially if you don't want to follow what the spiritual master is recommending and what, you know, Srila Prabhupada, the basics that he outlined for us. So it's important that we don't fall into this mood of what's the bare minimum that I can be doing. You know, and that goes for all of our services. We should be trying to do it very nicely. Shouldn't just be showing up at the last minute and just putting forth the smallest amount of effort I can possibly, put in. This is an offensive mentality as it is. If we're working hard for Krishna, we're putting forth proper effort to achieve to please him, then naturally he will give us love over time for it. I was just hearing Bhakti Vikas Maharaj speak about this yesterday, and I thought it was interesting that you brought it up. So I thought I'd like to share that. And then I heard another point. This is kind of a side point. I thought it was interesting. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he actually said that his father, he left his body through this process that we're discussing. He left his body through the mystic yoga process. So, he came from a line of saintly people, and although this isn't the prescribed way that we go about in doing things, there's room in our disciplic succession, and we see that Great Acharya, his father, actually left this way. So I thought that was an interesting point on this.
That is interesting. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So, there were a lot of nice points in the purport. But the main ones that were standing out to me is how this Bhakti Yoga, it is a science. So if we can understand it through scripture, and then we can be able to present it scientifically to people. So they see it's not some dogma, you do this or you go to hell or whatever, but people can ask why, it can all be explained, and things are given systematically. There's symptoms, so these different things can be identified, like transcendental consciousness. It's not just that someone sits down somewhere and then he closes his eyes, he's in the clouds, or they say Om and then they're in outer space or whatever, some weird concoction like that. But there's actual symptoms. How does he sit? How does he walk? How does he speak? All of these things, and so they're given there in the Bhagavad Gita, like in that text 255. And then the other point was that, this yoga process, someone like Maternatha Singh, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's father, there's a very qualified person there who's able to do that. But I know I'm certainly not there. And Prabhupada is saying that in this day and age, it's pretty much nearly impossible for anyone to do that, these other yoga practices. So the topmost thing to do is to engage in Krishna's service, become purified, and the topmost service is chanting his holy name. So Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.